Thank you very much, Joe. I'm delighted to be here today, and it is truly my honor to have my book on Unep being launched in this distinguished way at this virtual stage. And I'm grateful that Executive Director Inger Anderson will be joining us, hopefully, as soon as the negotiations are moving forward and she can step out. Also, with the president of the UN Environment Assembly, Minister Rutevatn. Both of them have received the book and read the book, and we're looking forward to this event. So it truly is an honor to be here. But we'll engage. Today is indeed the launch of an year-long 50th anniversary of Unep, and we'll continue these discussions when Unep actually does turn 50 in 2022. I am delighted to share the virtual stage with Donald Canero. His knowledge and wisdom are reflected in the book, and we look forward to hearing the stories that he has to share with us from those early days of envisioning this organization, of creating it, and of hosting it in Nairobi. Anniversaries offer opportunities to reflect on the past and imagine the future. I have been studying Unep for decades. Here is the vision of the book that is coming out actually on February 23rd. It will be book in hand, and Unep, the organization that I have been studying for decades indeed. And so I started studying this in the late 90s. And once, like many academics, I advocated that governments should upgrade Unep to a specialized agency, like the World Health Organization. However, after poring over the archives of the meetings that led up to the founding of Unep and interviewing many of those involved, I actually changed my mind. Unep, I found, was not deficient by design. Its mandate was ambitious. Its structure was nimble. Its financing was flexible. So I set out to discover why and how Unep had performed, or how and why Unep had performed, and what could be improved. So to answer these questions, I've connected with the founders of Unep, the leaders of Unep, the partners, the member states, and many of the staff. And their narratives, their collective narratives, informed this book, this untold story that I am delighted and happy to share. In 2009, we convened a rare gathering, the Global Environmental Governance Forum in Lyon, in Switzerland, with support from the UN Foundation, the governments of Switzerland and Germany, the Horn of Africa Regional Environment Center in Addis Ababa, and UNITAR. And the forum brought together for the first and only time all of Unep's executive directors until that date. On this slide, from left to right, you see Maurice Strong, Mustafa Tolba, Elizabeth Dowdswell, Klaus Topfer, and Achim Steiner. So that's June 2009. Maurice Strong was the Secretary General of the first UN Conference on the Human Environment, the 1972 Stockholm Conference, where Unep was created. And he was the first executive director of Unep. Mustafa Tolba, at the time, was the Egyptian delegate, government delegate at Stockholm. And he had initially regarded the conference with suspicion, but became an ardent environmentalist and Maurice Strong's deputy. Then he would become the longest serving Unep executive director from 1976 to 1993. So in 2009, they shared their stories about UNEP's first 20 years, when the institution sought to claim its rightful place at the UN table and its journey over time. Ambassador MacDonald, John MacDonald, was the secretary of the US delegation to the Stockholm Conference. And in Glion, he recounted the original vision for the International Environmental Organization. He explained the strong support from the United States, institutional and financial, that's in the 1970s. And he detailed the dynamics around the decision to locate UNEP in Nairobi. In 1972, Ambassador MacDonald received the highest honor from the US State Department for his role in creating UNEP. And here you see the picture of Ambassador MacDonald on the left in 2009, and on the right in 1972, when he received that honor for creating UNEP from the State Department. So as we gathered in Glion and in other settings to hear from each other, to discuss, to debate, to deliberate, we learned about that complex institutional landscape and the very, very ambitious vision that the founders and the leaders of UNEP had. We learned about UNEP's form, its function, its financing. But we also heard of limited capacity, strained connectivity, and missed opportunities. We witnessed courage and leadership. In Glion, we gathered leaders across generations to reflect on the past and to envision the future. Several of the statesmen who were there, who shared their vision and their stories, have now passed. However, their stories live on. We have kept the network growing and continue to expand. And this anniversary, this 50th anniversary of UNEP, inspires us to rekindle the connections, to capture more narratives and more ideas. With this event today, we launch a year-long commemoration of UNEP's 50th anniversary, because 50 is a big deal. And our team at the Center for Governance and Sustainability at the University of Massachusetts in Boston would like to collaborate with all of you and are ready to engage and inspire and engage with your imagination and creativity. So finally, I'd like to say that this book is in memory of the women and men who have passed and who, with imagination and courage, created the system of global environmental governance that we have today and that we are trying to reform, and that our leaders are currently negotiating as we speak. This book is their legacy. It's their collective legacy. And so I hope that it inspires and empowers UNEP as it reimagines itself for the next 50 years. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to our conversation today.
All right, thank you very much, Maria. What a wonderful journey that has been. I was kind of worried about you going over 50 years in just a few minutes, but you've done an excellent job. And I think the next segment will help us to do that even more, because in the next segment, we have people who are currently working on different aspects of the issues that Maria raises in that book. But we also have people who have been there when it was happening, people who have been there during that period that Maria referred to, the early 70s, even prior to that, when the whole environmental movement was picking pace leading up to the Stockholm Conference. And to help us get all this in perspective, as I mentioned, we have Professor Maria Ivanova. She'll be joining that panel. We also have Ambassador Donald Canero, who was Kenya's ambassador at that time. Actually, he says that when the decision, Resolution 3004, was reached at the UN, bringing UNEP into being and bringing it here in Nairobi, he was there sitting in the Kenyan seat at that particular point. So he's going to give us interesting perspectives. Of course, we also are going to have Arnold Kraihuber. Arnold Kraihuber works for UNEP right now as we speak, and He's currently heading the law division. He's the acting director there, and he's going to give us perspectives of what is happening there right now. Like I said, we are very hopeful that at some point we would be able to get the executive director of Unep and also the honorable minister from Norway. But let me start with you, Ambassador Canero. I called you Donald when I meet you here and there. It's very interesting watching those pictures and seeing the men and women who made this all happen at that early age. And you were right there, the thick of things. Maybe you begin by just painting for us a picture of what that atmosphere was like, both politically and diplomatically, where for the first time you have all these countries from the global south, as it were, bidding to have a UN body located in this part of the world, and basically grappling with all the issues of design that Maria so eloquently brings out in her book. I would like to know from you what exactly that atmosphere was at that particular point in history.
Thank you, Joe, moderator. Thank you, Maria, for good introduction, good remarks as well. There are, of course, other colleagues who know UNEP and who know the UN, and this is a good opportunity to look back at what was happening in early 70s. The program, the outcome of Stockholm was by and large was agreeable after initial controversies on the scope of the Stockholm Conference itself and all that, an agreement that it was to be more than just reference to pollution. The program, the action plan, the principles, the 26 principles, Declaration of Stockholm, the institutional arrangements, all that I think came out rather well, and we were very hopeful. The issue that was controversial was the location of the new secretariat that was to be established. And this attracted many interests. There were those who felt it should be either in New York or in Geneva, where other UN agencies were. So those were already contending. And in fact, for much of Western Europe, the Nordic countries, Netherlands, it was quite clear they would prefer it in Europe. Of course, the United States would have been quite happy to have it in New York. Then there were countries in Europe that felt, no, it could be in London. That was the position of the United Kingdom. And it offered a big building and 150,000 pounds to go into that activity if it went to that country. Then there was France feeling perhaps it should be in Monaco. Then Malta felt, no, probably it should go to Valletta. Africa had 4 countries, Kenya, Nigeria, Zaire, and Uganda, feeling it should be there. And Asia had India, New Delhi as the candidate. Mexico wanted it in Mexico. So those are there. And then, you know, when we were doing all this, people, the Western countries were very uncomfortable, were not sure whether they would get it or it would go someplace else. And so the other issue was maybe the decision should not be taken in 1972, 27th session. It should be taken, it should be postponed to the 28th session, meaning they wanted to reorganize themselves and see how they would handle the developing countries, which were now more or less very insistent that it should this time come to the south. Then it was a question, what is the strategy that we are going to apply here? And Kenya, with African countries, Kenya having had already an interest in an earlier organization called UNIDO in 1965, 1966, and lost it to Europe, was very, very involved in this. We therefore put forward the first draft decision that ought to be, or that had to be on the table to guide the deliberations. And I can assure you,
now, Donald, I am sorry that I will cut you just a little bit short because of the amount of time that I can see we have. But I wanted to check. Okay. Eventually, of course, Kenya got this. And yes. What would you say? By the way, you know, this is all documented in Maria's book, so probably you need to get all this for all our participants and get that detailed account, because Donald is one of the people he interviewed there. But Donald, if you were to talk about what the vision of Kenya was for UNEP, why Kenya wanted it here, and how Kenya thought about this organization that would come to Nairobi.
Yeah. Okay, very well, moderator. You know, Kenya, as I mentioned, had already thought of having an organization that located in the South. The reason was clear. All the other organizations were in North America or Western Europe. Of course, in the colonial days, we would not say it should be anywhere, but now we were independent and we wanted to be a part of the international community, the new international community. For that reason, we said we lost it. This time we work at it and get it over there. And Africa came on board. Yes, this is very important. And the first strategy then was, all right, let's have this come to the South, which means that the North now takes a position to accept that this can happen. But we wanted equitable situation, and this was not favorable to some of this. So we said, all right, what we do? We then have these equitably distributed and be put in the South, and therefore we want the developing countries to have the headquarters of the new secretariat. This subject was very important to developing countries. We wanted to develop, we wanted something that was close to us, and we were not polluted, and therefore we wanted to showcase the South as a beneficiary of these kind of efforts. And
okay. Great. Thank you very much. And that debate obviously still raging out there about what the impact of that was, and the book deals with it a little bit. But let me come to you, Arnold, because with all of that history, eventually an organization came into being. That organization still exists today, and you are part of it now. What kind of organization would you say UNEP is right now, vis-a-vis what it was at the beginning, from where we are, because now we are going into the 50th year? Very briefly.
Absolutely, and thanks, Joe, for that question. Let me say at the outset, what a fantastic effort by Professor Ivanova to put this book together. I had the pleasure of being interviewed for the book as well. So I really want to congratulate her at the outset. And what a journey it has been for UNEP over the past 50 years. I think if you read the book and look at the developments, it's been a remarkable story. And for me as a UNEP staff member, I have to say I'm proud that I can now walk in the footsteps, or try to walk in the footsteps of giants like Donald Canero and others who have come before us. But Joe, with regards to your question, I think the journey of UNEP is also a journey of environmental multilateralism, and the way this journey has evolved, I think, shows that we've made significant progress, and that progress is also reflected in the way the organization stands now. I think the organization is stronger. is better equipped to deal with environmental challenges going forward. And since you mentioned the UNEA before, we have with the UNEA now a universal body, a universal parliament, if you will, to debate environmental issues in a multilateral setting. Now, multilateralism is never easy. It can be very complicated, but UNEP's journey also shows that multilateralism in the end is our only chance to really deal with the many environmental challenges that we face. And coming again, to this actual topic of the UNEA next week, because I think it's relevant to this discussion, member states will adopt a new medium-term strategy for UNEP, which outlines the next 5 years for this organization. And I think if you look at that medium-term strategy, it is a reflection of where the organization is today. And that the ambition, as you have said, Maria, is still high, that we are still committed to, I think if you put it, UNEP as a nimble organization. So we want to take full advantage also of other developments that have happened in the UN over the past 50 years, namely the UN reform to allow UNEP to increase its operational footprint, to really make sure that we succeed in our mission, not only to tell the world without scaremongering what the science tells us, but that we also get better in developing and implementing solutions. I think this is really where the organization will have to make its footprint shown in the future. We know what the science tells us. And if you look at the past 50 years, one of the big successes of UNEP has been institutional developments around the world. I am in charge of environmental law since 1972. You have seen a 38-fold increase of environmental laws around the world. Nearly every country has an environmental ministry. UNEP has helped to put into the world a number of global multilateral environmental agreements, which I think are a huge success for environmental multilateralism. But you contrast that with environmental assessments and scientific data that clearly shows us that we, despite having made the commitments to protect nature, to stabilize the global climate, and to reduce pollution and waste, as also Donald has said, was at the core of why UNEP came into existence. We still need to make much more progress. Right? All right. And so this is clearly one of the big challenges and also big ambitions of the organization.
And we'll engage a little bit when we now peer into the future about what really ought to happen from this moment on. But Maria, looking at just hearing the two gentlemen speak, this is a journey that you have covered in your book very comprehensively, looking at the past and the present that Arnold is talking about. And it's difficult to find one question to ask you. So I'll go very basic and ask, not many people study organizations in the granular detail that you have attempted to study UNEP. Why UNEP? What drove you into this?
Well, there are not even many people who know UNEP as UNEP, the acronym. And it's become my mission that it does become known, that it is something that people relate to, even if it is an acronym. And there have been attempts at changing the name of the organization so that it is more visible, more relatable. But I think that the mission of this organization is so critical to all of us. It's critical to everyone's survival, not just of the human race, but also of other species. And so it is the mission of what I call the anchor institution for the global environment that has inspired me. And trying to figure out, how was it created? How has it performed? Why? Who were the individuals involved? What were they thinking when they created it? And then, so I started this as a graduate student during my master's program in the late 90s. And surprisingly, there was not a single book about UNEP. There were books about the World Bank. There are about 10 books in the last 20 years on the World Bank. There are books on the World Health Organization. There are 2 books on CITES, talking about multilateral environmental agreements, Arnold, on the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. There are 2 books about it, but not an academic book about UNEP. I just saw in the question and answer that Stanley Johnson has joined, and Stanley wrote the book on UNEP at 40. But it was commissioned by UNEP. It was commissioned by UNEP to celebrate UNEP's 40th anniversary. And so being surprised as a scholar, as a student, that there was no academic book about UNEP, I have continued to do that. This indeed should have been published many years ago, but as it happens, the story was so rich, so nuanced, that I went to talk to all of the individuals, and today you see the result of it, many years later. But I will tell you this, we already have requests for UNEP at 75. So I will continue to study this organization, Joe.
Wow, that's amazing. But in the process, you actually ended up changing your mind about certain perceptions you had held yourself as an academic. I mean, because there was a popular conversation within academic circles about the need, as it were, the supposed need, I should say, to upgrade UNEP to a specialist agency. You spoke about it a little bit in your opening remarks. That was rather dramatic. I mean, where you set out with all these perceptions, and then down the road you say, no, UNEP does not need upgrading.
Well, yes, and you would be surprised that this story, it has not been told. And in a sense, this is why my book title is The Untold Story. Because in academia, we often get another story, that governments created UNEP to be weak, to be inefficient. This is the deficiency by design narrative that has become so prevalent in international relations, in international organizations. And this is what I set out to challenge, or first to test. You're absolutely right. I started this journey arguing, publishing, actually the argument for a global environment organization. And then I asked, why don't we have one? Did they not know what they were doing? Did they miss something? And who are they? And that's what led me to the archives of the United Nations, to the living rooms, the kitchens, the offices of all these people who were thinking about the organization. And I am grateful because they were alive when I was doing that research. I could sit down with them. I could talk with them. And so when you meet with John McDonald, who was the secretary of the US delegation and drafted the resolutions that would then become Resolution 2997 in 1972. And he tells you, no, I did not want to create a weak institution. No, we did not want a weak UNEP. And then you rethink that story. So that's been my drive. And surprisingly, Joe, to this date, just this week on my Facebook, colleagues that I respect are writing, UNEP was created to be weak. And so I've engaged now, and I say, no, I disagree. And so I'm engaging on Facebook as we speak with this narrative.
And one of the people, when you ask who are they, I think would be Donald, because he was right there. I don't know, Donald, what you would say about this whole conversation about whether UNEP was deliberately created to be a weak institution that couldn't deliver on the huge mandate that was placed in front of it.
No, sir. There was no question of government, over 100 governments getting together to create a weak organization to deal with a very important subject that they had worked on for 4 years. Clearly, if it was to be a weak organization, the struggle to get it out into Europe, out of Europe, all these other places would not have arisen. Why would you create such a body and then fight to keep it if it's a weak and useless body? The subject matter was extremely complex and important and interconnected between the North and the South everywhere. and therefore it was absolutely not. Yes, that the definition, the mandate was to work to coordinate the environment in the UN system, but it was to really go into more than that. And a weak organization, you know, with no funding would not be the case. And yet the government created it knowing very well there would be a component of the regular budget as a part of the secretariat. The governments would be voluntarily contributing funds to the support of the organization, and everyone was going to chip in as necessary. And so it was clear it was to be a small secretariat, but a secretariat which was top heavy. For example, with an undersecretary, several assistant secretaries general, several D2s, top heavy, so as to engage both the UN system as a whole and to engage governments without reference to the headquarters, because these were senior and knowledgeable and involved.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a reminder to our participants that you can keep sending your questions, as we mentioned, using the Q&A function. And we've got quite a few questions here. I'll just try and look at some of them. And I think that, Arnold, this one will be for you. This is Felipe Cortes from Chile. He says, I would like to ask on the role of UNEP as Secretariat on some of the multilateral environmental agreements. Do you have any thoughts on how UNEP can improve synergies and coordination among these agreements through its decision-making mechanisms and avoid duplication with other independent secretariats? That's a question from Felipe Cortes from Chile.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, and thanks for Felipe for that question. As I mentioned in my previous remarks, I consider multilateral environmental agreements as one of the success story of UNEP. But, you know, speaking legally, they are independent treaty bodies, and so they have their own decision-making mechanisms, and they take their own decisions on how they want to take certain agendas forward. But there is increasing recognition, which is also surfacing at the UNEA and related discussions, that in order to be effective, and I want to come back to the sentiment that I expressed earlier, putting the commitments that member states have taken better into action going forward. There is a recognition that synergies and policy coherence across these multilateral environmental agreements needs to be increased. A lot has happened, for example, if you look at the chemicals and waste related conventions, particularly also in terms of the institutional setup. We have these now co-hosted, which from an operational point of view already creates synergies and coherence. But member states are also actively looking into increasing coherence and synergies across, for example, the biodiversity cluster of multilateral environmental agreements, which will be very important as we look into the future towards the post-2020 biodiversity framework, which is currently being negotiated. What UNEP does programmatically is that we want to provide to all these multilateral environmental agreements, and particularly the ones that are hosted by UNEP. That's another important institutional aspect that I think often gets forgotten or is underplayed. What we want to do for these multilateral environmental agreements to support them and to support their agenda is to create programmatic linkages. So we want to see ourselves as a docking station for their agenda. This could be profiling their ambitions, their goals, their targets in the work that UNEP does as the global leading authority on the environment, but also in terms of our programmatic and project-related activities. So short answer to your question, Felipe, there is already a lot underway, but again, coming back to my point of what will be the critical challenge I see over UNEP's next, hopefully, a glorious 50 years, we need to really work harder to put the existing commitments into action so that people around the world can feel that something is changing and that also the planet can start to breathe again, and that we really make progress in terms of our commitments. And MEAs play a critical part in this.
Thank you. And this one I'll pose to Maria. Maria, this is from one of your students, so we will not wait for the next class. Anna Dubrova, she's asking, Maria's book is a prime example of academic research conducted and presented to inform practice, functioning of UNEP in this specific case. Now the question comes, what is the role of science and academic research in environmental protection and global environmental governance? And what should young researchers and graduate students do to make their research more visible and impactful in practical terms?
Thank you. This is a great question, and I really want to have a shout out for all of my students here. They also become alumni, and I mean, Joe, you and I have worked together since the 1990s, and you were one of the emerging leaders in Lyon. So the short answer here is, you never get out of academia. You always inhabit that space, and you inhabit the other space of policy, of action, and you figure out how to do that. I am really delighted to see our students at this event, but also the other potential students that the people around the world who have been asking these questions. And we often ask ourselves, what is the intellectual merit? So what should I study that is theoretically rigorous, that will have an impact on the state of knowledge? But today, in this century, answering of what it is and why is not enough. We are pushed to say what should be done about it. And this is one area, this broader impact is an area where academia has not been very active. In many departments, you'll be pulled back and say, no, you can say what the state of the world is and why, but you shouldn't say what should be done about it. And so to make our work count, honestly, it takes talking to people. This is what Ambassador MacDonald wrote in the foreword to the book. Indeed, Ambassador MacDonald wrote the foreword, and he passed away a few months later. And in his foreword, he said, the only way to solve a conflict is to sit down and talk about it face to face. Well, we now have a different face-to-face definition, but this is what's important. Whenever you want to make a contribution to the world, you have to go to the individuals that actually are making the difference, to the Donald Caneros, to the Ambassador MacDonalds. And this is how we're not only going to be rigorous theoretically, but we're also going to be applied in a policy sense, but we're also going to preserve and I think enhance our humanity in the process.
Okay, thank you. There's one more question here. I'll first throw it to Donald, but I think either of you can also then respond. But it's from Janos Pastor. He says, of course, congratulations to Maria on the book. Then says 50 years after Stockholm, 30 years after Rio, where UNEP was relatively absent, he says, and 6 years after the SDGs, how do you see the future in terms of the evolution of UN institutions addressing sustainable development? It says that, do you expect more of the same, or do we have something different, a new approach, including a different UNEP? That's the question that he's asking. What do you see is already making us begin to peer into the next 50 years?
Thank you, Joe. The current 50 years, UNEP has done well, has struggled, and has succeeded as far as a lot of its own groundwork is concerned. And I think the opportunity in the next 50 years is going to be even more challenging, more interesting. If you look at Maria's book, chapter 7, it discusses in a great substance the directions, the challenges, the opportunities. And I think the international community using the governments playing their role to make the the UNEP even stronger in terms of programmatic work, in terms of financial resources, is going to ensure that the future is much better than now. Nobody challenges where they have come from and so on. Now it is, the journey is made clearly for where we go. And we hope, therefore, the future, the present and the future will hold well as UNEP becomes an even greater organization than was envisaged earlier on.
Okay.
I think the path is set.
Thank you very much, Arnold. Let's come to you. The same question, just trying to look at the next 50 years of UNEP. What do you see? How does UNEP get better going forward?
Joe, since I hope I can play a little part in the next 50 years of UNEP, I think UNEP's future looks very, very bright. But as Donald has said, we shouldn't take it as a given. I think we still have to keep fighting for UNEP's role in the world, for the role of environmental multilateralism in the world. And I think we have grown stronger over the past 50 years. And I think we need to continue on this path. The challenges before us are huge. And, you know, we've talked a lot about UNEP's mandate, and it's such a wonderful mandate. I'm not sure any other organization in the UN has such a beautiful mandate. But we need to keep working on this mandate to really make sure that we can deliver for people and the planet. And what Donald has said is very true. We need to keep working, modernizing our own institutions. We need to mobilize increased buy-in from governments to really implement the spirit also of Rio +20 and make sure that we can provide the world with the solution it increasingly is so desperately looking for.
All right, thank you very much. Actually, I see Inga has joined us. Karibu sana. Welcome to our discussion. I'm so sorry you couldn't join us early, but we understand. We were giving you an apology because you were involved in something you couldn't delegate. Welcome.
I feel very bad, very, very, very bad, because this was actually one of the events that, not that I should have preferences, but that I was truly looking forward to coming to, and I am coming in rudely in the middle. So I will not reflect much. I will say a huge thank you to Maria for this extraordinary book that she has written. It highlights and helps us understand the history and the journey and the complexities of UNEP from its very creation, and some of its frailties. And you write it with such love in your heart for an organization, but also with a stern headmistress admonishments of what we need to do. And I like that very much. I told you that I read it in one sitting. It was sort of cannot put the book down reading, because it presents to us the hope and the opportunity that the founders of UNEP had, as well as the, as you say, frailties. We are an environment, we are registered or listed, and the aspirations of us being the authority of the global environment. Do we fulfill that? And what do we need to get to being there in authority and the authority? We are listed as an authority. And there's much to be done here. Now, you are deep in this discussion, and there's 9 minutes left, and I have 1,000 things to say, which I will not do now. But I think what we are trying to do in UNEP, and this is why we are moving ahead with this UNEA online, and I pushed very hard from this, was not to let UNEP go into slumber, was not to allow for us to say, well, we can't meet. And I'm proud, and I have to tell you that the other international organizations that are members of the UN families are watching us right now, because I have said that we cannot not act on environment. And that is why I'm so very, very proud that we will be having UNEA step 5, step 1 on Monday. And what you will see is that we are looking to, and today I can tell with some confidence, pass a new medium-term strategy. And this is not just talk. This is trying to say that the world is facing these 3 planetary crises, and without action on them, and we need to focus on them, we are not going to heed the call from the next generation, the generation that will inherit our mess. And so, Maria, you put the challenge before us all. I'm not going to speak anything more, Joe, but I do want to appreciate that I was given a couple of minutes here as I barge into this, and to speak in front of Mr. Canero. It is a great honor. And so let me just say that thank you very, very much, and hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one more thing. I mean, we will not let you go before you answer this, but I mean, this is something that Maria has done over the years. Actually, many people here have been sweet talking her to do another volume so that Inga can be the first in that one. But but how do you see the findings in this book helping to move the agenda forward, both in terms of even within the functioning of UNEP, but more broadly, the bigger question of environmental governance on that global level?
Look, Maria's book speaks to the successes, but also the failures, right? Maria's book speaks to, and Arnold is my witness here, because I've been observing this since I came on board. I may be seen as a newcomer to UNEP, but I've been a fellow traveler for nearly 40 years. So I'm not unfamiliar. I've been to most of the COPs in the history since Rio, right? So this is not new. And now I see we have the minister and president. So this is getting better and better. So I will say this, that the frailties of UNEP is part of the fragmentation of the environmental governance fabric, and the inability maybe, or the inability and the short-termism that is deployed in this context. We get that they're national interest. We get that these things have to be negotiated. But at the same time, we cannot do so without keeping that longer, deeper horizon, that eyesight into the future. And part of what Maria's book does is it allows us that 50-year perspective, which allows people like me, and I hope you will be around to write the sequel, but then, to take that deeper look, because without vision and without strategy, we'll get nowhere, but also without a working machinery and without working with the member states whose voice we have to be. But we also need to find, and this is where the Secretary General is very clear, how can we work with the new modern world, this networked, inclusive multilateralism, that multilateralism that allows these other voices to be heard, because environment is not just a state issue, it is everybody's issue. And on that, I'm going to stop, because I'm speaking in front of the minister, who I'm sure will speak exactly to some of these points. So let me stop here.
All right, thank you very much, Inga, for such insightful comments. I mean, this coming at the tail end of our discussion, obviously would have loved to have more of you in this conversation as we were starting, but as we mentioned, obviously that wasn't possible. And yes, we can now also welcome the Honorable Minister from Norway. He's the president of the 5th session of the UN Environment Assembly, which partly explains why he was not able to join us at the beginning. But sir, maybe in just 3 minutes, this would be a place probably to say you give some closing remarks. It would have been the opening one, but yes, it's good to have you, and just speak from your heart to these people that are here, having engaged a little bit with the book.
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to join this event. I'm very sorry to join you this late. I was at a meeting, but I am sure that your discussions have been very exciting and fruitful. I was asked to reflect on where UNEP is at the moment in light of the current times that we are in. My remarks will therefore touch on exactly that. Now, Professor Maria Ivanova is a longtime friend and advocate for Unep and a friend of international environmental governance for many years. She has delivered a milestone contribution with this book. At 50 years, it is timely that we reflect where is Unep currently at and where should it go to be the sentinel for the environment. I think Professor Ivanova makes a strong case that better understanding where we have been can help us steer a better course for the future. But the backdrop for this anniversary is indeed daunting. We are facing some severe environmental challenges. More than ever, we need a strong anchor institution for the global environment. Learning from the past is important, but we need real action given the planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. In addition, we are also in the midst of a global pandemic. The tasks ahead are indeed considerable. But yet, I remain hopeful. In her book, Professor Ivanova shows how individuals, politics, and geography have shaped Unep. It makes the case that Unep has a strong starting point, perhaps even stronger than some of us would consider to be the case. I believe that the wind is blowing in the right direction for Unep and for its ambitious mandate. I am part of a generation that is leading the way and demanding more. Caring for the environment is becoming mainstream and it is becoming profitable. And in the years to come, there will be more leaders like myself who know that the stakes are higher if we don't act. Professor Ivanova has provided a range of suggestions as to how Unep could become more effective. We're all dependent on a stable and healthy environment. My primary thought at this point is therefore that it would be wise to consider carefully Professor Ivanova's argument as we consider what to do next. I have to admit, however, this could mean taking a second look at some of our long-standing assumptions about what we believe is needed to strengthen Unep. Are we ready to do that? Given the challenges we are facing, I believe it is exactly what the youth are asking those of us entrusted with responsibility to do. Transformative actions, however, require a new thinking and making sure any assumptions we have about how to get the strongest Unep are still sound. I think this book can help us in that respect. And with that, I say thank you for getting the chance to address you at the end of this meeting. And I hope that we can all take lessons, enjoy the many advices and reflections that are provided with this book. And hopefully it will make us all a little bit smarter and wiser. And hopefully it will make Unep and the World Environmental Governance Framework even stronger. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. It's not over until it's over. I'm told we can do a few more minutes, 10 minutes maximum. So maybe if we could just take a few of the questions that have been coming here and see, we've been, throwing them to different people. And if I can see a few that will relate to the lady and gentleman, then we can do that. And I think there's a question here touched on a little bit earlier. It comes from John Scanlon, says the interrelationship between Unep and the MEAs it administers, and those it does not, has generated a lot of debate for many years. Much of the attention over the years has been on administration rather than substance and program. What, in your view, is the best approach? How should Unep best interrelate to the MEAs? I don't know if I need to get volunteers or shall I volunteer somebody? Yes, Inga.
Thank you. And John, I'd like to tell you that was yesterday. And what we've tried to build, and again, those from the MEAs, I'm sure some of them are there, we've really sought to rethink the way in which UNEP and the relationship to the MEA, the way that we can safeguard that. And here I do disagree with Maria, who says, snip the apron string and let them go. Because I think that, and that's in your recommendations, I think that
That's
would
good.
be a mistake.
Disagreement is
Rather, it is about looking at UNEP understanding its role. And it's not HR, of course it is, HR and yada, yada, yada. But if that is what UNEP is seen for, UNEP will have failed. It has to be, and this is why I have deliberately used non-legal terms to describe the language and the relationship between UNEP and the MEA that we have the great privilege of hosting. And by the way, I describe the same with UNFCCC and with UNCCD and with Ramsar. And there's a general acceptance that this is good. So what do we say? I speak about UNEP being the tapestry upon which the MEAs are woven. I speak about UNEP being the docking station for the greater environmental conversation, but not about one controlling the other and the relationship between two governments, because that is clear. The parties stand within an MEA as sovereign to that MEA and end of. But there is strength in understanding that what has happened since actually the World Heritage Convention, which is not even hosted by UNEP, and up until today, all of that suite of conventions, understanding that the more they talk together, and talking together and self-convening is hard, so they can do it on this tapestry. The more they do that, the stronger the environmental implementation is. Now, if we had a magic wand and there were no conventions, and we wanted with a big swoosh create something that would be a convention for SDG 13, 14, etc., we probably wouldn't have 17, 18, 19 of them. That's the truth. But here we are, and we have the legacy that we have, and so we need to work with that. And I will tell you, John, that so we have a plan for the year on 10 meetings that we will have substantive conversations with the MEA on topics that they and we have contributed to, in addition to town halls and monthly letters and all kinds of other stuff that makes the tapestry meaningful without making it become controlling. And I think that that's the way that we need to move forward. Let me stop here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yes.
I have to jump in here, Joe, because I cannot.
Yes, please go ahead.
when the executive director says, I disagree with Maria in what she says in the book, and I have to jump in and say, oh, we actually agree on the fundamentals of it. And I love the articulation of a tapestry, right? That yes, we heard from Arnold in the beginning that one of UNEP's biggest successes is the creation of all of these environmental agreements. And yet, in my analysis, it is also one of the biggest challenges of how do you keep these agreements. That is what has created now competition rather than collaboration. And so my suggestion of, yes, cut the string, let them go, means do not control them. So I actually, Inger, I think you and I completely agree on what should be done. We have to hone our language and see, okay, how do we say this? But what Unep Strength is being the only institution in the world that can provide the entire picture for the entire environment, the environmental issues. Not only is that its mandate, that is what Unep Authority is in. And so Unep is the place that can provide the 30,000-foot view of the 3,000-piece puzzle. And all of these different conventions are part of it. And how not to control them is the challenge. How to make them come to you, how to make them all come and weave that tapestry, bring that puzzle together. And then I absolutely agree that we have to actually empower societies, people, individual, worldwide, to deliver on this vision. And honestly, what is happening right now of us connecting across the world at the same time, being face to face in a new way, is telling us this is possible. We can do it. And so I challenge us all in the next year, as we are gearing up to note UNEP at 50, that we figure out how this will happen. And it's really amazing. I thought about this weekend. Ambassador MacDonald was 50 years old when he drafted the resolutions that were to become UNEP, when he was at the Stockholm conference and engaging to push the US to be one of the leaders of UNEP. So I think, with all respect to the youngest member of this panel, Minister Rotevatn, surprisingly, he's now the youngest member of this panel. I actually challenge the 40 and 50-year-olds. This is our time. We have to come together for this institution and get it ready for the next 50.
Wow, wow. What a challenge. One more question for you, Inga, before I let you go. And this one is from Cynthia Coolborn of Colorado in the US, and says, is UNEP prepared to coordinate the private non-profit sector, giving example of Bill, Melinda Gates, etc., and the general public groundswell around to improve the Earth's health? How or what additional actions will be needed?
You know, I think that, I think that
Cynthia,
that sector, the last thing they would want is to be coordinated by a central body. What they want to be is empowered and given voice, let inside the room, be allowed to speak, be heard, not just for the sake of a photo opportunity, but be heard for real and actually influence the path of the future. That's what I will leave Bill and Melinda Gates. They don't need to be let in. They have many rooms that they can enter into. But NGOs and civil society and scientists and organizers and youth activists. What I think has happened maybe over time in multilateralism is that sometimes we've gotten stuck in a groove. And I think that some of these new thinking, we saw the Climate Action Summit, where frankly in 19, where frankly youth activists took over the United Nations headquarters building and made something move, right? So I think understanding what it is that it takes and making that, enabling that, and not just having the one youth voice at the end of a long day to come in with some sort of a statement, but making it meaningful. And frankly, that's part of what renewal of multilateralism has to be. And I know that Minister Rotevatn has strong views in this regard. And so it would be wonderful to hear him, because indeed, you know, we need to challenge. And when you say, Minister, about, you know, are we ready? Do we dare? And I think we have to. And those of us who've been on this battleground for some decades and haven't lost the hope or faith are ready to stand with those who will carry it forward once we have retired into our whatever we're going to do in the next chapter of our lives. But making that happen, I think we have a constellation. And I would like to add, we have a Secretary General who's opening doors to UNEP like never before. Never before have we had a Secretary General who speaks UNEP's language the way he does. The State of the Planet address, he, not I, will open with me, will launch with me the synthesis report, because he asked to. This we will do, I think it's tomorrow. And the point here is the Secretary General himself wants to add his voice and the weight of his office to this cause. So never before have we had the kind of chances that we have. And with leaderships like Minister Rotevatn, what more could we wish for?
Thank you very much. And just a brief note that right after this, if you would like to engage a little bit more with Maria about this book and some of the issues that are coming up, we'll have a more informal session coming up right after this. But now we need to hear those strong views. Minister Rotevatn.
Well, thank you all for your kind words and your many compliments on my apparently young age. I will have to note though that looking in the mirror a couple of days ago, I actually noticed that I now have one hair in my beard that has turned gray. So I'm getting older. I'm not sure if this happened because of the process of getting the joint bureaus to agree on a political message at UNEA, but it happened regardless. So so things are happening everywhere now. But let me just make a few points. I think you know, there are many endeavors you can take. There are many important tasks that you can try to accomplish that can sometimes feel hopeless because people don't care about them, or other priorities have to win through, or this is like yesterday's fight. I think none of that goes for the essential mandate of UNEP and the global environmental struggle. Quite the contrary. One of the things that I find most joyful about my portfolio as Minister of Climate and Environment, and of course also as President of UNEA, is that I know that there are millions upon millions of people, and especially younger generations, that have my back and that want us to act, and that would like to see action, not now or tomorrow, but yesterday. And I think it's worth to take note that even in the midst of a global pandemic, where obviously politicians of the world are mostly concerned with saving lives, stopping the pandemic, saving businesses, the environmental agenda is still moving forward. It's moving forward in my country, in Europe, in the United States, at UNEA, because I think politicians of all ages are realizing that, you know, we have short-term crises like the pandemic, but we still have long-term crises like pollution, biodiversity loss, climate change, and they haven't gone away. And unlike the pandemic, it's not like we can just socially distance for a while, stay at home, and develop a vaccine. That won't solve the environmental crisis. We have to build brick by brick, change the way we do business, and make sure that we cooperate in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So I don't think I could have chosen a more inspiring portfolio to work on. And I think that even though all international processes are nitty-gritty and they take time and we need to find consensus, we're moving forward. And that is very inspiring indeed. And I have no intention of quitting anytime soon. And I hope that this UNEA 5 Part 1 will be a success. In fact, I am sure that it will be.
All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This is a great conversation. It really has to come to an end at some point, considering obviously for Inga and Minister Rotavatten, they've had a punishing schedule, and I would imagine that many people here as well. But that is not going to, as I mentioned, is not the end of the conversation. Right after this, we'll have an informal conversation. If you want to pose more questions to Maria about the book, if you want to have discussions, you could just stay on and we'll have that. But at this point, allow me therefore to thank everyone who has taken part in this discussion, our panelists, including the two ladies and gentlemen who were not able to join us from the beginning, but we are truly, truly grateful. Inga Anderson, Under Secretary of the United Nations, but also Executive Director of UNEP. We also have Minister Sveinung Rotevatn, who is the president of UNEA at the moment, as you know, is the Minister for Climate and Environment of Norway. Maria Ivanova, we are going to hang out with you a little bit, but Professor Maria Ivanova is one of the main reasons why we are here today. Thank you very much. Ambassador Donald Canero also joining us, giving us a compelling historical perspective of how we should look at UNEP's past and helping us to get ideas on how to peer into the future. And of course, we also had Arnold Kreihuber, who also joined us and gave really illuminating perspective. So thank you very much. You are all free to leave at your own pleasure, but we will have a further conversation going on here. Thank you very, very much for taking your time to be with us. So as we mentioned, there is a part 2 to this, and we have many people, by the way, Maria, who've been asking a number of questions, people wanting to know some things about the book, but mainly people trying to reflect on what this means and what the future holds. I don't know if you want to give some further thoughts about the journey of this book. You've told us a little bit, but you made recommendations at the end of this, which are interesting, and I think you summarized them in capacity, connectivity, credibility. Maybe this could be a conversation starter as we get into this next session, Maria. From where you sit, having looked at the history of UNEP, having spoken to people who were there when it was founded, having spoken to people who have actually led the organization, and spoken to people who reimagining what could become of UNEP in the coming years. What is, in summary, that picture that you see for UNEP going forward?
So thank you, and thank you for all who are staying on and engaging in this conversation. I truly appreciate it. Would love to hear your voices. And in terms of what you just heard and where we can go, I mean, you saw we have differences. Many people will say UNEP has been extremely successful. I will say yes, but its success is actually diminishing. It has diminished, and part of it is because it has been so successful, it has created a lot of competition for itself, and it hasn't quite managed to hold that. That includes the capacity, the connectivity, and the credibility, Joe, that you are flagging. So indeed, my vision with this entire book is not to tell you you've been successful or you have failed, because neither of these are true, but to actually see, okay, what worked, under what conditions. How can we recreate these conditions to move forward? And I just have an article in Nature, in this week's Nature, that summarizes my recommendations for UNEP. And Natalia, maybe you can put it in the chat if you haven't already. It's open access. But basically, I say three main things in that article that UNEP should do. One is that UNEP should make its role as a connector much more explicit, much more visible. It should own that role, be the connector. And nowadays, that's more possible than 50 years ago, especially with all of the new technologies, and location is no longer an obstacle, and it's not even a constraining factor. And secondly, I think UNEP must become the authoritative scientific body platform on environment. So it produces the Global Environment Outlook reports. I think the day of the old 200-page report is over. And so I think what UNEP should do is a much more dynamic platform, much like this one that we are engaging in, and to actually create, let's call it Siri for sustainability. So that when the minister comes in, he takes his phone, or she, and says, "Hi Siri, what is the state of wetlands in my region, in my country? What is happening? How does that relate to climate, to endangered species, to trade in endangered species?" So it has to be this authoritative scientific voice. And then my third point is that it has to be that connecting tissue, or that collective space for vision for environment. So what we're witnessing right now is the UN Environment Assembly. This is why they were late. It's the preparation for this Environment Assembly that will take place. So UNEP has, for the first now and only time, that in the last few years, since 2012, the Rio +20 summit, UNEP has a governing body that is universal, 193 members, but it has to make it actually interesting for people to come to it and to weave that tapestry that Inger was talking about. So those are my three recommendations: connector, the scientific voice, and the space where people collaborate and they come to UNEP to articulate a common vision.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we are trying to upgrade every attendee to be able to just mic their questions. I don't know if that is already happening, but we should be able to. Yes, I see John, you've raised your hand. Maybe we can just hear from you what your question, comment.
Congratulations, Maria. I think that's the book is tremendous. We've been waiting for some time, but you know, to achieve perfection takes some time. Anyway, I look forward to being able to discuss it with many of my colleagues and friends from over the years, and it will provide a great foundation. My question has to go with your point about becoming a scientific authority. And I think that that's critical because we need to really look at, to be able to determine the effectiveness of governance and of program and policy. Both, we need to understand the effect of the environment on the ground. So not simply have governments done what they've said they're going to do, or what have the international institutions, but has it actually changed the state of the environment and improved people's lives? And that's where we need that information. And that connection of the state of the environment and people's lives is a critical one. So while UNEP should be providing information, and it should be independent and not simply dependent upon governments, but also have independent scientific verification on the state of the environment, presenting that information in a way that it can be linked with the economy and with social issues is a critical one. So it can't be done by UNEP alone. And UNEP needs to coordinate and cooperate with the UN Statistics Commission in particular, but also some of the banks and that. And that I was so pleased to hear Inga's comments about cooperating with others and with the question about the private sector saying, well, nobody wants to be coordinated. Well, they don't, because coordination means somebody's in charge of telling everybody else what to do. But that cooperation is a good one. And with Inga there, I think that there are greater opportunities for cooperating with the MEAs and with the other institutions, because having the technical science information is not sufficient. It's got to be presented in a way it can be integrated with the economic and social information. And there has to be an archive of data so we see the trends. And we should be able to go back. This is something that those of us involved with GEO for many years said, we don't need to reinvent. We need to have a data source that shows, okay, well, how are we doing compared to 5 years ago? And how are we doing compared to 10 years ago? And what are the actual trends of the environmental situation on the ground? UNEP doesn't seem like it's ready to do that. But I've been a part now for a little while. I'm hoping that you can correct me, and I'm hoping that others with UNEP will say, yes, okay, they're doing
it. Thank you, Maria. Maybe you could make a brief comment. I see many hands here.
Okay. Well, John, thank you very much. This is the voice of John Matusak. From the US State Department. John, you didn't introduce yourself, but I know who you are. I recognize that
I
voice.
avoided his second name because it was rather difficult to pronounce. Thank you for helping me out here.
And John was also the chair of the Committee of the Whole in the last UN Environment Assembly. And I mean, your expertise is really extensive, and thank you very much for joining here. Thank you very much for engaging with me on the book. And I completely agree with you about the scientific authority and the need for trends and comparison. This is one of the main issues, though, that UN agencies are fearful of. And here's where I highlight the work that we're doing at the Center for Governance and Sustainability. And Natalia Escobar-Pemberti, who's been managing the chat, and was my first PhD student, and now an alumna and a professor in EAFIT in Colombia. But Natalia created, that was her dissertation, the Environmental Conventions Index. It became our endeavor at the center, and I'd encourage you to engage and think about that. That is information that is over time, it's time series, it's comparable, and we compare how countries deliver on their commitments to international environmental agreements. However, the UN says, no, we can't rank. It's like, okay, you cannot rank, but we can, the independent academic institutions. So this goes back to an earlier question about the role of academia. And so on your point, John, about having more than environment, absolutely. And this is why we also have to have collaboration and not coordination. And that's why I was thinking and articulated as the Siri for sustainability. And so what would be the role of UNEP in that is to be decided. And I'd love to think with people about that.
Oh, thank you. I see Trista Patterson, whose 4-year-old son was asking a short while ago, what's the future? Trista.
Hi.
We're here. Hey, Solon, they're going to answer your question. Do you remember asking them some questions? So Solon is 4 years old, and he was listening to Joe speak, and he said, "Mommy, what's the future?" And I think that this is a really relevant question because we're talking about reflecting on the past 50 years. Some of us are reaching nearly 50 years, aren't we? Yeah, is that old?
Yes.
Yeah. What's it going to be like when you're 50? Do you know? No, he doesn't know. But are we talking about the next 50 years? Are we talking about the next 100 years? I mean, if human history, if the Earth's history were mapped on a calendar year, I think humans will have existed for the past just the last 42 days of that calendar history and have absorbed 1/3 of the Earth's resources in only the last 0.2 seconds of that calendar year. So the challenge is vast. And when we're thinking of the millions upon billions of people that have to be supported looking in the future, are we talking just about the next 50 years when we're having this discussion? Or are we talking about 100 years? Or are we talking about the next history of human civilization? I think that it's important to put language on some of that, not only for ourselves, but also for the youngsters that are listening to us talk about it.
Oh my God, Trista, you're so right. And so great to hear your voice in this setting. So Trista was part of the team for Global Environment Outlook, and we worked together in that setting in 2010, 2012. So both to your point, John, and Trista's, but I would love to ask Joe that question. What is the future? But to me, let me just give you a quick reaction. And someone had put in the chat, someone who works for UNEP in Brazil, that most of these analyses are from a Northern perspective. And I think the definition of the future too, Trista, differs of who we ask. Because if you ask in a Chinese civilization setting, the future is thousands of years ago, or thousands of years coming forth. If you ask me as a Bulgarian, I am from the city of Plovdiv in Bulgaria, which is one of the longest inhabited cities in Europe. It's 5,000 to 6,000 years old as a city. And yet, when we talk about the future, especially from this perspective of indeed a Western capitalist mindset, we think of not even 5 years ahead. And so to talk about UNEP's next 50 years is a stretch. People don't think about what would be the next 50 years of an organization. And I think that we have to think in the immediate 5 years, but also the 50 years and then the 5,000 years. And that requires a totally different narrative. And Trista, we need a game for that. I know you work with UNEP on Playing for the Planet, and that would be a wonderful game.
Wow. Oh, I see Julia Martin Lefebvre. I remember you from another life.
Yes, hi. Of course, I was involved with Maria when she was just a young student, and
I know, and I don't know if Maria will allow me, but she said something that ended up actually contributing almost wholly to the title of some of the films we did back then. You know, when you said, I don't know if you recall this, that
I do.
what we are dealing with here when we're talking about all the MEAs and all the fragmentation we've seen over the years, you need like a conductor, like someone who conducts an orchestra to create a symphony with all this and just get the music going.
Right, I think I invented that under a tree in Nairobi, but I use it all the time. I love music, and if you don't play in harmony, it's terrible to listen to and it doesn't work. So let me do, first of all, this is so great to have this book. I know how hard you worked, and it's great, and it has to be relevant. Yes, 50 years from now, but next week already. So let's get going. Just, I put in a question, Maria, I don't know whether you I haven't finished reading the book yet, but I don't know whether you've addressed this, but how would you look at history when you look at the way UNEP was involved with the 3 Rio conventions and also with the 2 science policy platforms? That's my question. Was that the right role for UNEP? And then I just need to say about science, because when I first got to know some of you, I was running the biggest and the most prestigious NGO in science. In those days, that's how I got to know Maurice Strong, and we were the International Council for Scientific Unions. We were the scientific advisors to Rio. So it's very hard to see how an intergovernmental organization could become the most authoritative voice on science, as you said earlier. Thank you for your wisdom on those questions.
So I would love to talk with you more about this, Julia, and given your incredible expertise and experience in science, but also in connecting people and also in moving leaders forward. I mean, you were the head of LEAD, and so many people that you have touched across the world are now in leadership positions all around the world. And so let me just say on the science question, that's something to really think about. Can an intergovernmental organization be an authoritative space for science? Probably not as the originator of science, but yes, as the place where you can go to get that science together, right? To see the different pieces of it, because I can't imagine any academic institution or even the International Science Council now of bringing this together. Maybe they can. Of how do you bring that sustainability picture? So ultimately, I do think it has to be collaboration, and we have to work together, and that collaboration happens at the individual level, and only later does it happen at the institutional level. And this is also partially an answer to your question about the conventions. So why did UNEP have a very different relationship with those conventions in Rio? So the 3 Rio conventions are climate, desertification, and biodiversity. Climate is completely independent, utterly, totally independent. Everybody knows the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and they have the yearly conferences of the parties. Biodiversity is within UNEP, and desertification is is independent as well, but is much closer related to UNEP. And so honestly, this is indeed the crux of the issue about UNEP's authority, UNEP's visibility, UNEP's relationship to the environmental issues and to the conventions. Many of the people I've interviewed have said UNEP could have had, the climate convention could have been within UNEP, but when governments experienced the heavy-handed Tolba negotiations on ozone and subsequently on chemicals, And when climate was becoming a very, very hot issue internationally and very political and very economic, they thought, oh, maybe that should not be within UNEP. That should be an independent body where we could exert more influence. So this rich tapestry indeed of stories that are individual, but then they connect to an institutional dimension, an institutional narrative is really important. But ultimately there is no right or wrong question, and not right or wrong answer right now, but there are better or worse answers. And I'd love to work with people to start thinking about and writing about how we answer all of the questions that come through today.
Wow, there's Stanley Johnson. Your hand has been up for a while. I think it would be good to hear from you. Please remember, you can raise your hand if you need to make a comment, ask a question.
Well, I just want to say how lovely it is to be here, and how happy I am that Maria has produced this book, and thank her for mentioning the UNEP plus 40 narrative, which I read in 2012. And of course, Maria, I do take your point that this is probably not a very academic book. It had lots of photographs, for example. Anyway, I mean, I was proud of it, and I think it got a good reaction. But it's absolutely wonderful to have your book. But actually, the point I would want to make was really inspired by the thought that nothing is more appropriate than when you come to your 50th anniversary, which, by the way, I had about 30 years ago. But when you come to your 50th anniversary, you say to yourself, well, what is the big challenge I have now? You know, that's a pretty important thing. And I was very taken, actually, by the meeting which took place just before the end of the year, when UNEP launched. It's something it does every year, but it launches what's called the emissions gap report on climate change. And the executive director made a very powerful presentation, and there was a lovely lady also from UNEP, whose name was, I'm looking it up, Anne Olhoff. She made a really good statement. Now, the point I'm trying to get at is, if any institution is tremendously well placed at this moment to take a view, a moral view almost, on the whole climate change issue, and indeed on the biodiversity issue, which is another one of the challenges, I would say it is UNEP. And I go further, and I would say, even though the UNEA may not yet have decided what to do, it was absolutely clear to me, listening to the executive director as she spoke about the number of countries who had come forward already to say they espoused the let's have a global net zero carbon goal by 2050, it suddenly seemed to me to be 100% appropriate in the run-up to Glasgow for the executive director to say, well, actually, folks, we ought now to adopt this global goal, because it would be an absolutely useful complement to the Paris Convention agreements, which dealt with the temperature rise. And of course, it may well be that you could actually sneak in there also, if you were lucky, a 2030 goal. And by the way, the parallel would be, and exactly is going on, is the Kunming outcome document, which, by the way, is now being negotiated with 2030 and 2050. Now, I'm trying to make a general point here, and that is that this organization, UNEP, as it looks to its next 50 years, has to say to itself, well, we do have a moral authority here, and we are going to use it. And sometimes the executive director will have to get out ahead of the governing bodies. Do you see what I mean? And bring them along, as indeed I would hope she would do this week on this question of global climate goals. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
Oh, thank you very much, Stanley Johnson. Actually, he is the father of the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. All right, it's really, really great to hear from you. And Maria, I see you nodding, knowing it looks like there are quite a few things that he has raised that touch on you. I wonder how much of a build-up it was from his book Unep at 40, and then here you are with Unep at 50. How much has changed for the last 10 years?
Are you asking me, Joe? I mean, I can say that from my point of view.
Please do.
Okay. Well, I'm 10 years older.
If you were to write your book again 10 years later, perhaps.
Well, this is a very interesting point. If I were to update this, and by the way, I think with wonderful you've got Maria's book out there, but I do think I'm sure that Unep has all the pictures and has all the typescript, and bearing in mind the wonderful work Maria has done. By the way, Maria, I counted up the number of times you mentioned me in your footnote, and it was 25 times. So I'm happy if we were to pinch some of your stuff. But I do think that you in Unep, whoever is still online in Unep, ought to think about, as it were, updating the Unep Plus 40 book to talk about some of these key issues. For example, in the Unep Plus 40 book, I only had a brief epilogue on the UNEA decision. Now, the last thing you want is a whole chapter on institutional issues. I think what I would do is to say, look, in this last 10 years, we've had some major pushes on climate change, major pushes on biodiversity, and I think the third of the priorities which the Norwegian Environment Minister absolutely mentioned is the pollution issue. And I think to point very clearly in an update of the Unep Plus 40 book, and by the way, I do think you would have more pictures as well. I mean, I don't see why not. Pictures are good. Pictures speak more than 1,000 words. Am I right about that? The last thing I'd say, though, and it comes as the third message of the report I was mentioning, the emissions report, and that is the change in lifestyle. If any organization in the world is good to push changes in lifestyle and make a systematic effort, that could be Unep. Thank you.
Excellent.
Maria.
Thank you, Stanley, for joining in. We have indeed been talking for years with Stanley, and way before you were thinking about, when you were thinking about your book. I remember our Skype conversations then, and it's been wonderful to see this moving forward. And I so agree with you about the moral view, the ethical view, and getting out ahead. In a sense, that goes back to what I was saying about UNEP and the multilateral environmental agreements and the leadership of Mustafa Toba. This is, and I describe this in quite some detail in the book, because this is perhaps the only academic book where there are profiles of the leaders of the institution. And so I had the privilege to sit down with Mustafa Toba on multiple occasions, on several days, and discuss what his work and his legacy, as well as with others who would see it from outside. But he was a scientist. He was a scientist, but he also trained himself as a lawyer, as a policy person. And he also said very clearly, I know that I am the executive director of UNEP, but I'm a scientist and I have a duty to say what is wrong. And I have a duty to say what should be done about it. And so in a sense, he used the institutional space and authority he had to push that agenda forward. But that does not always fall on receptive ears. And so it also depends what the geopolitical situation is at the time. Who are the governments? Not only who is at the table, is it the United States and France and Britain and Kenya and Uganda? No, who is in those governments, and are they ready to hear? Are they ready to work on that? And so this is why I think this particular event, and now all of these connectivity events, are very important, so that we raise the bar.
And Maria, that's an interesting thing you said, because I noticed that in your works, you focused a lot on individual leaders and the role that they played in this entire journey. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that, what you see as the place of leadership in moving this agenda forward. You've done, films on the place of leadership. You have, even in your book, you actually go through the tenure of each of the the executive directors, for example, of UNEP, and what contribution they made towards changing the trajectory of the organization over the years.
Yes, I started by studying institutions, and the only way you can study institutions that to me was ethically and morally gratifying was to study the individuals within those institutions at that time. And so this is why this book has taken so long, because I wanted to go and talk to the individuals that were working within the institutions at various levels, right? And I see many of you today in the participants list of people that I have been interviewing, people I have been working with. And I'm very grateful for your insights and your input. And as you mentioned, Joe, I mean, you've known Julia for years, Julia Martin-Lafèvre, because we met her through these interviews about the institutions. And yet then you connect as individuals and you carry that work forward. So I think leadership is absolutely critical, but leadership happens at multiple levels. And this is what I think, again, in a Western view, in a Northern view, when we say leadership, we talk, okay, here is at the top. And yet there are so many ways that people lead, and also people have to learn to follow. What is good followership? How do the people within an institution then come behind a vision? And these questions are really, really important. And that goes back to the question of what is the role of academia? And academia often says, oh, we will be educating the leaders of tomorrow. But I think that has to happen on many, many different levels. And we also have to educate of how we all follow, because we all have a particular place. We may be a leader in a particular way, but we are followers in another setting.
But what foresight that was. I mean, gathering all of these people, because I looked at, for example, the Glion meeting in Switzerland in the summer of 2009, and then you had all of these people. Many of them now have passed, but that was profound in the sense that the kind of information you got from them, you couldn't have got it anywhere else. And look, now they are gone.
Yes, and this was the impetus behind convening that event. I mean, it was surprising that institutionally, all of these executive directors of UNEP had never been in the same room at the same time talking about the same issues. And because I was studying the role of individuals in institutions, I had gone and talked to all of them. And then I just asked them, would you come together? And they said, yes. And then we worked with Julia. We worked with Julia Martin-Lafèvre. So we created a series of events, and we celebrated Maurice Strong's 80th birthday. And that was also an invitation and an impetus for a lot of people to book that and go to that event. And so we created them back to back. We had the call for emerging leaders. We said there are so many young people who would benefit from meeting these visionaries face to face. And we had the call for applications. And Joe, you were one of those emerging leaders in that setting. And so it is that movement between individual and institutional, but then always remembering that each one of us is an individual. We're all people, and then connecting with the people that you meet along the way and respecting them for what they are, for who they are, for their also their constraints at the particular moment, and dealing with respect with all of these other people. I think that's what's at the core of honorable research that then hopefully makes it into the policy arena.
Yeah, and now that I see that we are almost coming to the end of this, I mean, you've done this book over several years, I would say, I don't know, decades maybe. And here it is now, it is out. And obviously you're hoping that it will have a certain kind of impact. So what would the success of this book look like for you? What does success look like if you were to say that was worth the effort?
Whew. This is the new measurement of impact, right? In and actually, yes, at 1 o'clock I have to talk to my dean, and this is exactly what I'll bring up. But these are the conversations we're having exactly right now in academia. What is the measure of impact of any academic's work? And to me, honestly, this engagement with others who think that these issues are important and we have to work on them together is a success. I have to tell you, we had to think about the event today. So there are many options. Do you have a closed chat, so nobody is allowed to be on the chat? Do you only have Q&A? There are various views. People are saying, you don't know how people will react. Maybe we should just close the chat and not have that option. But we said, no, these are people who want to contribute. We will open the chat, we'll moderate it, we'll work with people. To me, Joe, this is a success. So what happened today for me is a measure of an impact that I had not anticipated. I had not planned for it last year. And also, academic books take a long time to publish. And Stanley, they also don't allow pictures that much in academic books by the publishing houses. And they only have to be in black and white, the pictures. So a few months ago, none of us would have imagined this kind of engagement with a book. And to have the president of the UN Environment Assembly, the executive director of the institution, Donald Canero, long time Unep staff, and you, Joe, you moderated the first presidential debate in Kenya. You are the environmental journalist in Africa. And so to me, that is an extraordinary measure of success. So, but to Trista's point, that's very immediate. It's not about the future. So I'll have to step back, think about it, reflect of what would be the measure of success for the future. And so I'd invite people to put in the chat, what would you say would be a measure of success? How do we measure the impact immediately, in the short term, in the long term? What is the future for you? But thank you for this question. I need to think more about it.
All right, and I think we need to end this one here. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to end this. This is your event. I mean, all of these people have come together to take part in this work that has obviously taken the contribution of very many people. And having spoken with the fathers and the founders, as it were, of this environmental movement that later gave birth to UNEP, as it were, having studied this over the years and interacted with even the emerging crop of passionate environmentalists and people who really want to move the needle, what is that one thing that you would tell the 60-something people who are still with us here as they go back to their different spaces, having listened to what has been discussed here, and in order to really make this effort worthwhile?
So first of all, thank you, Joe, for moderating this event, and thank you to all who joined, and thank you to my team of absolutely amazing doctoral students who made this entire event possible, and the team at UMass Boston and at UNEP that really believed in this and put it together. What I would like to say is that we are all individuals that work for collective purposes, and we have to see, understand, but also own our place in the world and in any particular sector. What I just want to share one story that struck me very deeply, and in Glion in 2009. You may recall, Joe, but we watched footage from the 1980s when some of the people who were in the room, that's 2009, were then much, much younger. Gus Speth, Wangari Maathai. And people said, oh, I am watching Gus Speth, who would then become later the administrator of the UN Development Program and the dean of the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. And he was there in 2009. People say, oh, look, that's Gus Speth in the 1980s when Gus had hair. And the reaction in the room was split. Listening to Gus Speth, to Wangari Maathai, to many of the leaders with footage from the 1980s, half of the room said, wow, these people have been working on the same issue for so many years and the environment is still degrading. We have pollution, we have climate change, we have depleted resources in so many ways. How can they go on? And the other half of the room said, wow, these people have been working on the same issues for 30 years and they're still inspired and they're still here and they're still working on that. Wow, that is so inspirational. So we saw the same thing. We had exactly the opposite reaction in the same words, but with different intonations. And so my call to all of us is to be more of that positive force in the world. And there will be many instances where we will see, oh, this is so hard, but then we keep at it. We keep going, and we keep going for Solan, Trista, for the future that your 4-year-old son asks us, how do you define that? Thank you.
Oh, wow, what an inspirational note to end what has been an illuminating evening. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being part of this, for accompanying Maria in this journey. I know how important this is to her because this has taken a lot of time to put together. But thank you so much for your presence, for your contributions. And I'm sure this is a conversation that will continue in the different places that you will go. So thank you very much to the UNEP team and also to Maria's team from UMass. Thank you very much. And I think this is a good place to say good night from Nairobi because I think it will be different time zones everywhere. So thank you very much. Good night and good luck.
Thank you, Joe. Good night,
All right.
Nairobi.
All right. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.